Greetings, I'm Robert Lumley-Sapanski, the president of the Center County chapter of the United Nations Association. And on behalf of our board of directors, I'd like to welcome you to our celebration of UN 75, the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Each year we celebrate this event with a very colorful dinner attended by about 150 people from over 40 countries around the world, and many of the attendees dress in the colorful garb of their homelands. Of course, with the COVID pandemic, the board of directors realized this would not be a very wise thing and very unsafe, so we've opted for Plan B, and we appreciate your joining our program. The theme from the United Nations this year for UN 75 is celebrating the past, the present, and progress towards the future. As far as celebrating the past, we had a recent board member named Bonnie Willie pass away not long ago, and in her memory we are dedicating this event to Bonnie. A current board member and one who served with Bonnie years ago, Norma Keller, has written this lovely dedication, and I'd like to read it right now. Bonnie Willie joined the Center County United Nations Association in 2005 after retiring from an extremely successful teaching career. Because of her devotion to the goals of the United Nations and her career as an educator, Bonnie was a perfect board member to take over the leadership of our Education Committee. With great energy, enthusiasm, and creativity, Bonnie led our chapter to do its most important work, teaching citizens of Center County about the vital role played by the United Nations and offer opportunities for citizen involvement. To this end, Bonnie and her committee developed local programming on each of the 8 Millennial Development Goals and the role each of us could play in honoring and striving to reach these goals. While she helped people of all ages, her talents knew no equal when focus was on children. During a year when our United Nations Day focused on climate change, Bonnie submitted a successful proposal to the Center Foundation, and our chapter was awarded the funds to purchase age-appropriate books on climate change that would encourage child involvement and making a difference. Bonnie and board member Latha Bhushan spent endless hours reviewing and selecting what they considered the most meaningful books for Center County children and adolescents. They both had the joy of presenting these books to representatives of every elementary and secondary school and library in Center County on United Nations Day. In addition to her work on the Education Committee, Bonnie always involved herself in the development of her UN Day dinner, which often attracted 150 guests. Her specialty was using her artistic talent to develop the written program and theme-based centerpieces. A most memorable occasion was when Bonnie and fellow board member Norma Keller took a beautiful snowy train to New York City to attend the UNA International Conference held at the United Nations. Bonnie dazzled guests from 50 nations as she spoke with great pride about the many accomplishments of our UNA USA chapter in Center County, Pennsylvania. Bonnie was a key to so many of those accomplishments. In 2010, Bonnie left this work behind and moved to Oregon and received specialized health care as she began her life-changing and relentless battle against recurring lymphoma, which eventually claimed her life only 2 weeks ago. Bonnie's daughter wrote a stirring obituary. My favorite line summarized the Bonnie we all knew so well. She was a kind, strong, principled woman endowed with a deep well of wisdom. She inspired the best in the many that she touched, encouraging them to embrace life. For those of us who had the joy of working with Bonnie, every one of these words ring true. A certificate commemorating our service will be presented to the family. And we wish Bonnie the rest in peace. Our program today consists of the following. We'll have a few videos commemorating the anniversary of both the UN and the UNA. Center County Commissioner Michael Pipe will present the UN Day Proclamation from the commissioners. We've invited Brian Massa, the United Nations Foundation's Director of Global Health Advocacy, Immunization, and Global Health Security, to join us. United Nations Foundation is a parent organization of the UNA, and he brings messages from them and will speak about his involvement to children's health and our involvement with the Shot at Life program. We're then honored to present our featured speaker, Her Excellency Professor Dr. Judi Wakhungu, who will share her talk entitled United Nations at 75, Reflecting on Global Commitment to Multilateralism. Dr. Wakhungu lived here in Center County for a few years as she received her PhD at Penn State, and then went on to be the director of the Women in Science Engineering program at Penn State. In closing, then, we will present our program on Make a Difference, and we've selected Shot at Life, a program that provides life-saving vaccines and other health care to millions of children around the world. So I mentioned this is also the 75th anniversary of the United Nations Association of the United States of America, although its earlier iteration was involved in creating the San Francisco Conference where the UN Charter was signed in 1945. The United Nations Association, UNA-USA, is a movement of Americans dedicated to supporting the United Nations. We have over 20,000 members, 60% under the age of 26, which is really exciting to know, and has more than 200 chapters across the country. UNA-USA members are united in their commitment to global engagement and their belief that each of us can play a part in advancing the UN's mission and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We owe a great deal to Eleanor Roosevelt, who was instrumental in making our association a success. She simply strolled into the main office down in Washington, walked in and said, "Give me something to do." And they gave her a desk, and eventually she became the head of the UNA-USA, and again, very instrumental in getting it going and working in the post-World War II environment. There's also over 100 countries with UNA chapters involved in supporting the work of the UN. And here is a brief video about the history of the United Nations Association. We urge you to join the Center County chapter of the United Nations Association. It can be done very easily at our website or the main unausa.org. We will be putting that information up at the end of our program. Those under 25 can join free. It's called the Gen UN. And for seniors and those on a limited income, it's $25 a year. Half of that money comes back to our chapter to support our work locally. We've been very supportive of our local Model United Nations teams, including fundraising for the Bellefonte team to travel to an international competition in Toronto, Canada. And of course, we have our Make a Difference projects every year. We raised tens of thousands of dollars for a variety of much needed projects around the world. So again, we are the Center County, Pennsylvania chapter, and we'll put that contact information up at the very end. Next, we want to present a video from the United Nations itself, giving a brief history of their 75 years of accomplishments, with the most recent being that the World Food Program, a program run by the United Nations, was the recipient of the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize. The World Food Program has gotten food to over 93 million people in over 88 countries around the world, and we thank them for the work. Please watch this video from the United Nations.
Ladies and gentlemen, we meet again in the quest for peace.
And there's many who doubted that agreement could ever be reached by these 50 countries, differing so much in race and religion, in language and culture.
They even helped to carry the desks in.
We stand today at the threshold of a great event, both in the life of the United Nations and in the life of mankind. This Universal Declaration of Human Rights may well become the international Magna Carta of all men everywhere.
In order to eliminate the threat to the peace in Palestine, an armistice shall be established in all sectors.
An armistice agreement has been entered into between the United Nations Command and the commanders of the communist forces in Korea.
For the first time in the world's history, a permanent international body to deal exclusively with the problems of non-self-governing peoples.
We will be even prouder when we can leave the Congo solely and fully in the good hands of its own people.
Dag Hammarskjöld is dead, but the United Nations lives.
We've seen a return to democracy in many countries.
I hereby certify that the electoral process in Namibia has been free and fair.
The dawn of a new era.
I therefore have the honor to declare the Republic of Namibia membership in the United Nations.
I think the major contributor to the success of the election of the Haitian people, who decided to come out and to vote to decide on their own destiny.
The people of Mozambique, who once again proved their commitment to democracy and a strong will to live in peace and harmony.
The Treaty for the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It is the most important international agreement in the field of disarmament since the nuclear age began.
We should not confuse the signing of agreements with the solving of problems.
Much work remains to be done, but the significant progress represents real successful diplomacy.
United Nations peacekeeping forces received the Nobel Peace Prize for 1988.
Peacekeeping operations symbolizes the world community's will to peace.
The creation of a UN peacekeeping force for Cyprus could only come about by positive action of this Council.
The protection of civilians is at the center of the United Nations peace and security agenda.
The first session of the International Tribunal for serious violations of international humanitarian law committed in the former Yugoslavia.
We have 113 trucks a day. At the same time, it is not like going through Fifth Avenue. We have to negotiate with checkpoints everywhere in order to make sure that we reach the people.
We're starting with no government, no civil services. Nothing remains in Somalia except some spirit and some hope.
I need your assistance so that I will be able to convince the member state to continue to offer the humanitarian assistance.
The right of life, the right to be free from torture and physical maltreatment, a lack of fair trial, limitations on freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of movement.
I am here to listen to you. I am here to learn. Tell me, frankly, how you believe the United Nations, myself and my colleagues can be helpful to you. Thank you.
Minutes ago, an explosion ripped through a hotel in central Baghdad, the headquarters for the UN.
The UN and the international community here have been simply stunned by what's happened. Officials are saying they believe it was a suicide attack.
100 people are wounded and 22 killed.
Today we share our shock and sorrow at the loss of people we loved.
Democracy, which everybody is striving for, is really a rather meaningless phrase if people don't have enough to eat.
The international economic situation has become harsh and unfavorable for all developing countries, especially Africa.
Realizing every person's rights to food is a moral and humanitarian imperative. Hunger is a stain on humanity. We are working together as a movement to tackle hunger now and in the future.
The humanitarian case is clear. It will be the world's poorest citizens who will be hardest hit by climate change.
Every week we're seeing evidence that accelerated climate change is here right now. None of this is hysteria. It is fact.
And I'm beginning to wonder how many more alarm bells must go off before the world rises to the challenge. Only courageous leadership
will make the goals of Paris a reality.
Behind every refugee, behind every migrant, there is a family, there is skills, knowledge, there is a story, and above all, I would say, incredible resilience.
It is the first intergovernmental meeting in the world where women form part of virtually every delegation.
We want to end gender inequality, and we don't just want to talk about it. We want to try and make sure that it's tangible.
Unless used as good,
it will forever remain.
I shall have to use force.
An indelible blight on human history, that it took as long as it has before all of us stood up to say, enough is enough.
Each lantern represents the hope we have for our future because of the commitments you have made to the global goals.
A renewal of commitment by leader after leader. This is absolutely critical to respond to challenges that affect all countries. That we are off track. Let's make it a turning point for people and for planet, and deliver a decade of action in achieving the SDGs.
The whole humanity is in this fight together. It is, I think, time for unity.
Today's United Nations does more than ever before. It does it better than ever before. Yet, our work is far from complete. Indeed, it will never be.
I would like next to present Center County Commissioner Michael Pipe. Michael has been a strong supporter of the United Nations Association. He's attended every one of our UN Day dinners since he was elected. And he would now like to read and present the proclamation from the Center County Commissioners in celebration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Here's Michael Pipe.
Hi, everybody. Center County Board of Commissioners Chair Michael Pipe with you, and I want to extend a congratulations to the Center County United Way Association for all of the incredible work that the organization has done in years past, and especially with everything that's happening with the pandemic. It's such a fantastic thing that you're putting on a celebration of the diverse and vibrant community we have here in Center County. The Board of Commissioners was very excited to proclaim, to do a proclamation, number 23 of 2020, to recognize the 75th anniversary in the establishment of the United Nations and all the work that happens with international cooperation, what that organization does, and for the great work that's done here locally by the United Nations Association of Center County. And so it is with great pleasure that the Center County Board of Commissioners again recognized through proclamation the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations. And we're very honored to be able to lift up and raise up the 2020 and beyond, shaping our future together, as this year's theme of commemoration. And we encourage not only people here in Center County, but people all over the world to join in the largest global conversation about their futures and the future we all want for our kids, grandkids, and our friends and family. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you for a few minutes, and thank you. So we will, again, see you soon in the future. We hope that you are well. We hope that your families are well, your loved ones are well, and look forward to continuing to create and cultivate a vibrant community here in Center County that respects diversity, that respects our differences and celebrates them and encourages them. So it is with great pride, again, to resolve, and we have proclaimed the 75th anniversary and the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Center County United Nations. So congratulations. Thank you for all the work that you do as part of this community. Be well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pipe. We always appreciate your support of our chapter and the work of the United Nations. Next, I'd like to present Brian Massa. Brian Massa is the Director of Global Health Advocacy, Immunization, and Global Health Security for the United Nations Foundation. Brian joined the UNF in 2015. He serves as Director of Global Health Advocacy, where he oversees the government relations strategy for the Shot at Life campaign. He also leads the UNF's U.S. government advocacy strategy related to the global health security agenda. Prior to joining the foundation, Brian served for 5 years in the Health Policy Office of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, chaired by Senator Tom Harkin. His portfolio included global health, infectious disease, vaccine development, and biosecurity, all very important topics at this time. Brian received his bachelor's degree from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, with a year studying abroad at the London School of Economics. He earned his master's degree in global health security jointly through the American University School of International Service and the George Washington School of Public Health. His research focused on the implementation and evaluation of the international health regulations. I'm honored for us to be joined today by Brian Massa. Brian?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Bob, for the introduction. As he said, my name is Brian Massa, and I work at the United Nations Foundation in Washington, D.C., serving as Global Health Advocacy Director with a focus on child immunization and global health security. In this role, I direct government relations for the Foundation's Shot at Life campaign, which your chapter has generously designated as the recipient of your Make a Difference project. Thank you for your generosity during this critical time in global health. I am honored to take part of this special event alongside Ambassador Wakhungu and County Commissioner Michael Pipe. Thank you, Bob, and the UNA USA Chapter Board for bringing us together virtually today. We are honored to be here to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Of course, this is not how we anticipated the world would be celebrating such a milestone, but I am inspired by the way advocates such as yourself have adapted under the circumstances of this new normal, finding ways to connect with one another to educate, inspire, and mobilize your community to support the UN's work. 2020 has brought unprecedented challenges that are currently impacting every person in the world. We are experiencing a shared urgency, not only to overcome a devastating global pandemic, but to rebuild a stronger foundation for global progress. It is only fitting that we look to the UN's history and celebrate its fundamental purpose today. The UN represents humanity's highest ideals and most ambitious goals. And yet it was born from our darkest days. 75 years ago, our world was devastated in the aftermath of World War II. From shared experience and suffering, we created a system that would defend us from our worst possible actions and equip future generations with global teamwork as a first line of defense. As many of you likely know, UNA USA was fundamental to the UN's inception. In fact, UNA USA members helped create and visualize the United Nations. That rich history with the UN is one of the many reasons we work to protect it, defend it, support it, and advocate for it. Former First Lady UNA USA Chairwoman and human rights trailblazer Eleanor Roosevelt said, "The world of the future is in our making. Tomorrow is now." The UNA USA community has always directed its mission by reconciling with the past, meeting the present moment with commitment to steer toward hope rather than fear, and creating progress by deciding what it looks like. Indeed, tomorrow is now. So here we are. It's been 75 years since the white laurels on a blue banner became a symbol of peace and hope for all of us. And thanks to the UN's work, we've had some big wins over the years. To name just a few, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a guiding principle for 193 countries. 85% of the world's children have received life-saving vaccines against devastating diseases like diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough. Smallpox has been eradicated, only the first time in human history a human disease has been wiped from the planet. There is also a global agenda to end all forms of discrimination, and more than 80 human rights treaties have been signed. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals were unanimously adopted, and the Paris Climate Agreement was enacted. Finally, just this past summer, in August, Africa was declared free of the wild polio virus. But back in 2020, we find ourselves in a similar backdrop as one in 1945. We're finding hope after World War II seemed impossible. Right now, major challenges and unprecedented scale are clouding our forward vision. The COVID-19 pandemic has stopped the world in its tracks, changing our lives overnight. This virus has taken more than 1.2 million lives globally and over 220,000 in the US alone. It's devastated global and national economies, exacerbated existing racial and gender inequalities, and taken a record number of children out of school and families into poverty. It's become very clear that COVID-19 is not only a global health crisis, it's a social crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a human rights crisis. And of course, COVID-19 is not only dangerous to our political community. Police brutality, discriminatory violence, and systemic racism against people of color, particularly Black Americans, are impossible to ignore. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Jacob Blake, Daniel Prude, just to name a few names in the endless list of lives stolen or harmed forever at the hands of police officers. We also fear the effects of climate change, which have become more frequent and severe. Deadly hurricanes, uncontrollable wildfires, record-shattering heat waves, rising sea levels. The threats are real and increasing. In the face of all these major challenges, our administration has backed away from the global stage, making the choice to retreat from shared progress rather than lead, as America has always done. In recent years, we've stepped back from the Paris Agreement, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and the UN Human Rights Council. We've cut vital funding to the UN's work, ending contributions to the UN Population Fund, aid to Palestinian refugees, counterterrorism efforts, UN peacekeeping missions, and the Green Climate Funds, to name a few. The US is estimated to owe the United Nations more than $1 billion in unpaid dues. And most recently, in a dangerous, short-sighted decision, our nation moved to terminate our relationship with the World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic. Let me take a moment to dive into that decision. Earlier this summer, on July 7th, the President transmitted a letter to the UN to begin withdrawal from the WHO. The action sets in motion a one-year clock that would result in the US terminating its relationship with the WHO next July. In addition, since this spring, the Trump administration has frozen or restricted funding for the World Health Organization, impacting the organization's ability to respond to the pandemic and protect existing global health initiatives like child immunization. The decision to abandon the world's preeminent multilateral global health organization during the world's worst public health crisis of the past 100 years is akin to shutting off the water to firefighters as they attempt to put out a building ablaze. The WHO has been effectively coordinating the international pandemic response since the beginning of this year. With a presence in over 150 countries around the world, the WHO is uniquely positioned to detect and monitor disease outbreaks, to conduct global clinical trials for future COVID-19 vaccines, implement public awareness campaigns, and distribute vital health commodities, as well as testing supplies and personal protective equipment. And the WHO does so while prioritizing equity and access to ensure that no country will be left behind. This approach will be absolutely critical once a COVID-19 vaccine is developed to ensure it reaches all communities around the world. Simply put, the world needs a strong WHO to recover from this pandemic. But investing in the WHO is also in the United States' own best interests. Our country provides technical staff from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention who coordinate critical US global health priorities at the WHO, like polio eradication, measles and rubella control, malaria interventions, and broader child health programs. If the US walks away, we will no longer have a seat at that table and be cut off from vital global health data that informs, for instance, how our own vaccine manufacturers formulate our seasonal influenza vaccine every year. This information, or lack of it, leaves us vulnerable to a more severe flu season. Withdrawing also leaves a funding and leadership vacuum that other countries like China are only too eager to fill. These decisions weaken the US global stature, but it also puts our citizens directly at risk. Now, the WHO is not a perfect organization, and we have already learned a great deal about the areas of pandemic preparedness and response that should be improved. But the WHO itself has repeatedly signaled it welcomes scrutiny of its response, and an empowered, independent, nonpartisan panel of global health experts has been created to systematically review the global response to COVID-19, and issue a report to the World Health Assembly next year. Simply put, regardless of the outcome of the upcoming election, convincing any next administration to rejoin the WHO is essential, and even a matter of life or death for US citizens and the global community. Now, it's easy to feel discouraged by the magnitude of the global challenges we face, and by the administration's actions to remove America from multilateral agreements. Many believe that America's hard-won leadership on the global stage is being undermined. But here's the silver lining. The UN was built for moments like this. As UNA USA advocates know, even a system built with the best intentions needs persistent voices behind it. When President Trump announced the US would withdraw from the WHO, UNA USA members like you took swift action, sending more than 10,000 letters to policy members in Congress to oppose this decision, educating your communities about WHO's crucial impact and raising money for the COVID-19 Response Fund to support WHO. And this certainly isn't the only time in recent months the UNA USA members have turned the UN's guiding principles into local action. Recently, Americans of all ages and races have been raising their voices to leaders at every level, from our city councils to the White House, to demand justice and declare that Black Lives Matter. Thousands of you have shown up for this effort, educating yourselves, communities, engaging in civil action, and sending thousands of letters to your members of Congress to support initiatives for lasting change. This year, your human rights advocacy didn't stop with letters to Congress. Hundreds of UNA USA members and advocates showed up to participate in the important UN process to hold the US accountable for protecting human rights. In November, the United States will undergo a universal periodic review of its domestic human rights record at the UN Human Rights Council. In preparation for this review, UNA USA campus and community chapters hosted local consultations to provide recommendations for how the US can do better. You submitted 11 reports to the UN Human Rights Council, which examined issues like gun violence, criminal justice reform, election integrity, gender discrimination, and immigrant rights at the community level. These are only some of the ways which UNA USA members are supporting the UN's goals and carrying out its work here on our own soil, even when federal leadership is falling short. So we've revisited the past and we've discussed the present. Now, instead of visualizing, let's instead visualize the future. But because that word feels distant, I want to think about the role in defining progress, so that we know not only what it looks like, but what it will take to push it forward. How do we create and implement a vision for progress? Earlier this year, in preparation for the UN 75 celebration, Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for the world's largest conversation on creating the future we want. UNA USA took the responsibility of bringing American perspectives to the table, holding virtual consultations with citizens from all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico to join the world in formulating a productive vision for the future. Combining the feedback of more than 80 consultations, UNA USA learned that 77% of Americans expect a worse world based on current trends. At first glance, this figure is discouraging, but all we have to do is look to the past and recognize a familiar pattern. Collective concern for our future is exactly what propelled the creation of the UN back in 1945. The truth is, if many current trends in our nation and our world continue, the world will likely worsen in many ways. At the same time, progressive action born from shared urgency are strengthening global efforts for change. For instance, people from across our country and our world are standing up to end racism. From our efforts to physically distance from one another during the pandemic, we formed new ways of connecting with technology that are bound to stick with us and expand the boundaries of our communities far into the future. We see more Americans, companies, organizations, and governments taking action to combat climate change. And although there is no way to paint a positive picture for the millions of Americans whose income or education has been affected by the current state of the world, we can only continue to advocate for a more inclusive, sustainable job economy and a more accessible and inclusive educational option for everyone everywhere. The input from UNA USA's consultation process is helping the UN build a better world right now. Americans identify that individuals, governments, Organizations and the United Nations all have a critical role to play in building the future we want. Progress must be defined with the future in mind. We press for change now so that future generations have a foundation to build on. As we near the end of 2020, we pledge to embark on a decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in time for their 2030 deadline. The only direction to go is the one that points towards progress. We all have a stake in our future, so I implore you to connect with a goal of your own to continue building this momentum to 2030. Reflect on what you can do or continue to do to be a champion for the SDGs in your community. Lean into this network of people who provide you both support and accountability, because continuing this dialogue and engaging with others is the key towards success. Progress will be realized when Black Americans feel safe and respected, when we save succeeding generations from the effects of climate change, when human rights are guaranteed for every person no matter where they live, how they worship, who they look like, or who they love, and when we can reestablish our nation's leadership on a world stage, working alongside fellow member states to prepare coordinated responses to future health crises. And in another 25 years, when the UN turns 100, we will surely need new, evolved definitions of progress. But the foundation will be stronger, and the UN will support humankind's never-ending pursuit to a better world. On behalf of Shot at Life, thank you again for your generosity in designating us as the recipients of your Make a Difference fundraiser. I would also like to invite everyone watching to take part in an advocacy action right now. As the global community commemorates 75 years since the UN's establishment, the UN remains the only organization capable of bringing 193 countries together under one roof to address an array of issues critical to all of us. That's why we need you to take action now. As I mentioned earlier, the US is estimated to owe the UN more than $1 billion in unpaid dues. This has serious implications for the UN's work. When we pay our dues on time and in full, we are stronger, safer, and more prosperous as we work together with the world. I think we can all agree now is not the time to step back from the global progress and the global stage and forfeit our seat at the table. So take out your phone and text UN75 to 30644 to urge your members of Congress to support US funding in full to the UN. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you all today, and congratulations.
Thank you, Brian, for your work dedicated to the health of children globally. And as I mentioned, we will be featuring the Shot at Life program as our fundraiser and our Make a Difference project this year. Information will be shared at the coming up soon on how you can contribute to join Brian in saving the lives of children and adults around the world. Now it's time to talk about our Make a Difference project. As I said earlier, each year we do run a fundraising project. Over the years, some of the projects we've done have been Shelter Box, providing emergency shelters when there's been disasters, both human caused and natural caused. Solar Box cookers, water purification, water carrier systems. Kiva, which is a program that gives loans to women entrepreneurs around the world, and they pay that back, and then we've been able to reinvest in other requests. Empowering Orphans, Neha Gupta, Penn State student, program that helped children in orphanages in India and now moving also into the United States. The South Sudan in Juba to Children's Center, both an orphanage and a school for children really at risk. The Hunger Stopwatch and such projects as tree planting and landmine clearing. So this year we are moving to the Shot at Life program, as Brian spoke about earlier, and we'll put up a couple slides now and tell you how we can get involved. As shared by Brian Mazza earlier, we really are at a crucial time for vaccinations in light of the COVID outbreak. It's estimated that 70 to 80% of vaccinations have not been able to get to where they were supposed to due to shutdown of shipment, etc. UNICEF itself supplied over 2.4 billion doses of vaccinations last year. And as you see on the slide, $2.7 million was directly granted in support of childhood vaccination work in countries around the world. Beyond the money, we do need continued advocacy and letting Congress and the White House know that we need to continue to support the efforts of the United Nations and World Health Organization. And you see some of the information at the bottom of that slide. The second slide tells you what we're hoping for. You see that $25 will protect one child against measles, polio, diarrhea diseases, and pneumonia for their life. There's a link there to go directly to our webpage. And at the end, the next slide's coming up, you'll get the website link for our website, and that'll take you directly to our Make a Difference project. So again, we're asking you to please help protect the lives of children around the world. A $25 donation will protect one child for life against these life-threatening diseases. Thank you so much. In closing, I'd like to thank Commissioner Michael Pipe, Brian Massa from the United Nations Foundation. I'd also like to thank our board of directors for all their work, not only on the presentation, but everything they do to promote the United Nations throughout the year. Special thanks to our newest board member, Trong Pham, who put this video together and had to put up with my technical ignorance throughout. Thank you, Trong. Please consider joining our chapter to help support the mission of the UN, especially in these difficult times. The Genuiners, if you're under 25, it's free, and people on limited income and seniors, it's $25 a year. Additionally, we could always use additional board members dedicated to these causes. So if interested, please contact us. One of the biggest perks is being invited to attend a global summit at the United Nations at the New York City headquarters each year. Please remember our Make a Difference project fundraiser for Shot at Life. That $25 will give a child lifetime protection from numerous killer diseases. Finally, we always feature live music on UN Day, which is tough this year. So we close with a celebration song from the Playing for Change Foundation, dedicated to getting music and arts education to children around the world, particularly in places it would not exist otherwise. They built music and art programs as well as actual schools in just about every continent. They do great work and produce wonderful music. So I'm Robert Lumley-Sapanski, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of the United Nations Association, Center County, thank you for joining us today on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And we close by celebrating with our future, children from around the world. Thank you.
To laugh through all the years. So bring your good times and your laughter too. We gonna celebrate your party with you. Come on. Celebration. Let's all celebrate and have a good time.